Thanks for joining the class. My name is Duke Craven. I'm from the Kingdom of Aidenville. I'm giving a class on coaching and evaluating yourself and other fighters to basically benefit improving your coaching and maybe kind of give you some ideas and thought process. A lot of this is based on ideas that I have or opinions. I've been fighting for over 25 years. Really don't keep track of it too much. And I think this is one of the important areas in the SCA that makes it unique compared to a lot of other activities because we don't have a formal school of thought on, or I guess really a specific formal style of fighting that you have to do, kind of like compared to other martial arts and so forth. So you find out, regionally in the world, there's different ways people fight and think and talk about fighting in the United States and Europe and so forth. Over the years, times have changed where it used to be, the most experienced guy at practice is the guy that teaches you, and you travel to go find, new information from other fighters who have proven to be skillful. And then as times change, people started going to online YouTube videos and so forth to look for more information, and collaboration has become a bigger part of SCA fighting and learning. But also, I think that has compounded even the misinformation or maybe misinterpreted information that people get. So it makes it a difficult thing to trudge through to figure out, what's right, what's wrong, and really when it comes to fighters, each of us are individualistic in a lot of ways, to where some things work different for us than other people. And you also have a variety of thought process of how people do things. It's just like anything out there that you learn when you teach people things. You have to figure out what kind of learner they are. And when you're a coach, you have to figure out multiple ways to deliver the same information so people can hit in a broader group of people and their learning styles. There we go. With that said, I think, I'm going to just go more into just, the coaching process of the way I look at, how I can be a better coach and the things I have to look at to do better as a coach. And I think it's never ending. I mean, I constantly try to, especially when I travel a lot more, the people that I've watched fight and, listen to talk about fighting and so forth, those people who, demonstrate some skill sets that I appreciate and I agree with, or, even disagree to some extent too. And the evaluation of how they apply things, really, because there's always more than one way to skin a cat. And I can't say that there's only one way and my way is the right way. And I don't think that's a good thing for somebody to be a coach and not be open-minded to new concepts or trying out new things. But anyhow, that's how I try to always improve, and I take that and I, put my my ego and pride aside to hear what other people have to say. And, I've grown and I've, held terminology and so forth alone, how people have dissected some things a little more deeper. I've added to my own toolkit because I appreciate it. And that's what that's for. And this is how it really works in the SCA. There's, no dojo you go to and join and start learning how to fight the SCA. You end up going to your local practice after you find it in whatever method online you do nowadays, or even in, like ads or whatever, right? But anyhow, let's start with evaluating your fighting for yourself and where you're at as a person to teach and coach fighting. I think the first place you really have to start is, being honest about your fighting with and keeping it in perspective. Because you have a natural ability with, let's say one of the fundamentals of, like range, you're, very solid of feeling that difference in range between people and, and being there doesn't really mean that range and you could teach range. You have to sit there and investigate it a little bit and kind of get it more outlined in your mind and poke and prod with other people that have taught the classes before and get an understanding of the concepts and how they're applied, so you can convey that information to other people and give it in a manner to where they can receive and build off of it. But you know, that said, you have to start to teach to get better at teaching. And the one thing I think you have to be honest with yourself about is your limitations and expressing those limitations to others. Because, a lot of times it's hard to tell somebody, I don't know something, when you're trying to coach them and they're looking up to you and you appreciate that they're looking up to you. That's, one of the benefits of doing that is, feeling, hey, this person's listening to me and great, I get to teach them and I want them to be great. And you got to go, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know how to tell you to do this, but there is ways to do that, and it's not just saying this is how you do it, but this is the way you believe it's done. And then go out and do a little searching, find out more information about it. Consult people that are in your circle. Coaching and learning to teach fighters is a collaborative thing. You and your friend who start fighting are teaching each other because you're just figuring out things the best you can. And then when you get another fighter in there that has more experience, it becomes collaborative then too. So don't be afraid to be honest and try not to get into realms that you can't teach yourself without enough knowledge. I think it's very important. But it also will push you to get more knowledgeable because you're never going to learn everything about it. The fundamentals, I think, is the one thing that most people we all grasp on that has a commonality across the SCA in a lot of ways. The terminology that we all use and the methods we teach it might be different, but I think a lot of the concepts are the same, based off of, the traveling experience I've had, I talked to a lot of fighters, and I really think those things are similar. It's just, maybe the names or the terms we use for things are not the same. But, so give that, some honest look and analyze, where you're good at with, with the things you apply and so forth and the things you understand and keep those in the right perspective. There might be some things you understand really well, but you have difficulty applying. Doesn't mean you can't teach it. Just, make sure you really do, because we end up having a lot of that as our requirement to vetted teachers. If they can't do it, then I don't want to learn from them. And unfortunately, that's not always the case. There's a lot of good football coaches out there that are not quarterbacks or linemen. They're people who studied football and how to play football and be a better player. So keep that in mind. The other part too is, once you analyze that, you got to really sit there and take a look at what is your understanding of the fundamentals. Where are you at with understanding range, shot mechanics, body mechanics, pressure and tension, and even timing and tempo. These are things you got to really kind of look at in the fundamentals of fighting and where your understanding level is and how they differ. Once you kind of get through that process there, now you kind of have an idea of, okay, you know what? These are my strong points. These are my weak points. I'm going to build on my weak points. I'm going to go investigate and talk to people, as I mentioned earlier. The other part is, realize who are some of the experts around. There's going to be people that are going to be experts in great weapons, or 9-foot spear, sword and shield. They may be an expert in, types of sword and shield, with a heater shield or, a round shield or buckler or whatever. There's going to be some experts. There's going to be experts in fighting at long range versus in short range stuff. So kind of get an understanding who are the people that really understand those, or the people that do it, and then the people who understand it. And that's where you go start doing some data mining for yourself to figure out some things and talk to people and, find out what happens in their perspective and when they navigate a fight. How do they teach the fighting? Like I'm not really a great weapons fighter. I know the basics, and whenever it comes time to teach those kind of things, I'll give some of the basic tips and pieces to it. But if somebody's serious about it, I really go find them somebody that's an expert at it because they're going to teach them the correct information. I am not. I'm not going to teach them anything that's going to benefit them in the long run other than how to survive, but that's my skill set, and I would, I don't want to cheat somebody knowledge just so I could say I taught them greatsword, so keep that in mind. And let's the other parts to this too. Once you kind of get to that part, you know where you're at. Always remind yourself, I'm continually learning. No matter how long you do this, you're always going to continue to learn. Just don't get into the world of hyper focusing on things that really don't matter in the long run. You know, the other part too is let's look at when you're coaching and teaching people, you have to realize there's different there's no weight classes and um, yeah, really, just there's just no classes. Everybody's in the same pool. No matter if you're 5 foot tall or if you're 6 foot tall, you're all gonna fight each other. You know, 200 pounds, 300 pounds, whatever. So we have to remind ourselves each fighter is going to be unique in their own ways. They're going to have similarities in their own ways, and that's the one thing you have to keep track of a little bit. And remember that, because when you approach each fighter, they're going to be different. Some are going to have some skill sets that are better than others, and they can be the same height, weight, and handedness or whatever. So each one's different, and you got to keep that way. They're going to have similarities. Identifying the similarities. I often refer to buckets for fighters, and when I talk about evaluating your opponent, I put people in like, are they a fast mover? Are they long range, short range? What kind of defensive tools they have, and I try to put them in these buckets. And it's a lot of, you can go into too many buckets, and I try to keep it simplified. And basically, it keeps them in a thought process of, okay, these are their strengths and weaknesses, and versus the occasional things and so forth. But so remember that they will have similarities, and you need to work off of what their strengths and their weaknesses are. Not everybody's going to fight the same, and that's the other part that I think I'm probably really trying to explain the best. Is everybody's not going to fight the same, and you have to accept that. And you got to encourage people to be to their individual strengths. They might perceive their strengths as different, but you as a coach, need to evaluate that, and look at what is their strengths and let that be, and encourage them to enhance those strengths while they're working on their weaknesses or exploiting their weaknesses. I guess is another food for thought to think about things. Don't think in the box all the time. And some things are out of the box are going to be good, some are going to be bad, but you don't know until you start investigating and looking at it and trying to go through the process. The other part too with that is, you have to give people time. I think one of the things we fail a lot of times in this club is when you start to fight, you want to fight better, faster. That's just, it's like, I play video games a lot. You want to get good quick. You want to level up fast. So you have all the tools and all the parts and the cool things that go with it, right? And fighting in the SCA is the same way. We want to accelerate. And some people are eager and want to put the time in, and they will. But really, the biggest factor of that is time and effort. And if you have the people with the knowledge that can help you, and so keep that in mind, that your expectations can't always be high, that they're going to be showing up all the time, even though they want to learn how to fight really well. They have to put the time in, and that's the key thing to sell to people and to get them be realistic about. And also that at the beginning, it takes some time to understand things. It's just like anything else. You learn to crawl before you walk usually. Every job you start at entry level, and that's what you got to get people into, accepting the fact that, hey, you will be good if you put the time and effort in, but you need to put in the time and effort to get to a point where you can start expanding, being good. I don't know how else to explain that. So with that, when you get your students and so forth, and you're trying to teach them, I think some of the key tools that you have to look at is, you have to build, observation skills, because, a lot of times it's very easy to sit there and say that this person didn't do this right. They were too close when they threw their shot. Their body mechanics is bad and so forth. But there's a lot more to it, and you really can't evaluate that based off of, one fight. You need to watch and fight multiple people, and people that fight differently, because they might not be applying something correctly with somebody that fights a specific way or a specific height. but they might apply it to somebody different, and so something's lost in the translation there with that. And so the multiple fights, give it some time. I have a few squires that are active and they're fighting, and I make sure to watch them fight on a regular basis so I can kind of analyze and think about it throughout the week. When I'm doing a long commute to work, I try to figure out where they're at, what they're doing, and sometimes I'll find out after a while that I was probably wrong in my first perception, and I go investigate a little deeper, and I'm like, oh, you know what, the root problem to that is different. So keep that on your list of things to do. It's like observe, because it is difficult because people want instant gratification. And anybody that travels or entertains doing pickups with people, and like if you're a knight or a Duke count or whatever, you're fighting and people come to you to fight and they ask you for a fight. And I said fight 3 times there. That was good, right? But anyhow, you got to they after they get done fighting you 2 or 3 fights, they're like, hey, anything I can work on. And really it's hard to say because you're like, well, you just fought me, and like in my case, I'm left-handed, and I'm 5'8", and fighting me might be different than most of the people that are used to fighting. They might be only usually fighting righties, so I really don't have a fair thing to say to them to work on because I could just steer them off in some bad direction. So people are used to that, trying to get that information. So be careful how you disseminate the information based off of how much you observed. And be honest and frank with them. It's like, I got to see you fight some more. I probably could give you some more information, but based off of what I saw, it's like, this is, I just give my observations. It's like, yeah, you were throwing your shots a little, it seemed like you were starting a little out of range with your shot, so it was easier to read. That was one thing, so anyhow, so people are used to that. So you do have to find some things to give them, and I try to use like a little praise. It's like, hey, your feet look a lot better than they did last week. When I'm, consistently training people or working with people, to give them some positive, because there are things they do right. Maybe they're keeping their feet at a good range, range from each other, and they have a good balance and so forth. But they might not be, applying pressure to get a good entry or whatever. Doesn't mean their footwork's bad. It just means that there's another area they need to work on, and they need to know that. But when you're doing that observation, I think one of the things I try to look in doing a lot is, I watch the multiple patches and I kind of look at, it's like, hey, where are they at? What's their range to their opponent? When are they initiating shots? Are they trying to, work with the timing, tempo, and pressure of a fight? Are they creating tension in the fight or not? And kind of get a look at that from the beginning of the fight and watch how it goes. And then, when they close and so forth, I look at more like, where are their feet? What's their body mechanics when they're getting in closer? Because those are more critical things at those ranges, too. And I kind of try to look at that. And, when there are fighters, it becomes a little easier to do because you're comfortable, their nuances and so forth. When it comes to newer fighters, it gets a little harder. And that's where you kind of got to step back a little bit and start looking at the whole pictures. Because a lot of times with new fighters, the one factor that's common amongst them is their armor. I've watched, they're either doing loaner armor, they're getting whatever they can together. They're buying stuff that doesn't fit them. The stuff's duct taped to them, to their body to make it work, whatever it is to get on the field, right? And sometimes your armor affects your fighting. I've seen guys with, basket hilts that are too small for the demigauntlet they have. And, someone tries to start explaining how to, do the, Spider-Man and the OK grip on your sword so you have some flexibility when you're throwing. But that person has none of that, so they're thinking they're throwing like a robot, and it's because they can't. And you go to explain it to them, that person doesn't understand it. They're confused. And then they can't do what you're asking them to do because their equipment doesn't work. So, that's just a good lesson to remember is, there's going to be a lot of pieces there you have to evaluate. So, being a good coach for people on a regular basis is helping them get into better armor. I don't think anybody would ever argue that, proper fitting armor is going to excel you in this. It will excel you. I guess I should phrase that better, right? Having proper armor will make you a better fighter in the long run because it gives you an opportunity to train and be proficient without having to waste. Um, you know, so observe them in fights. Try to look for them in other fights with people, and just look at those basic pieces. When you stick to those things, you can identify parts. And when you're, and like I took a formal class on problem solving when I was working in manufacturing, and then they used this fishbone thing, and it's been a long time, so I don't have it all detailed, and I could have researched it before this, but anyhow, uh, you start identifying the symptoms of the problem, and you start ruling out and looking for cause and effect of some of these things. So, like the demigauntlet and the basket hilt is a good example of a symptom that you could call, a symptom of not being able to rotate your hand to get to the target and so forth. And when you start troubleshooting it, you end up finding out that there's an equipment issue going on, and that is the real problem. So when you're analyzing their fights, look for the problems, but think of them as symptoms and see if there's a real problem other than the person, of course, right? We never want to say people are the problem. But analyze it a little bit, and the more practice you get at that, the better you are at doing it, and and the faster, because really, yeah, you're trying to process this because you only have a couple hours of practices a week if you're lucky. If you're greater and lucky, you have multiple weeks, and that's why the acceleration of skill sets happen with the more helmet time you put in, and the higher the quality of the helmet time you get, the faster that goes. If figure out the other part, I guess, really that I didn't touch earlier. Figure out what kind of how you give information. Because people learn. Some people are really good at learning from reading. Some are very visual. Some people have to do things right. And figure out where you're at in that spectrum, and adapt some tools to meet some of the other areas of how to do things with people. I do a lot of analogies for people, and or I try to find a common interest. It's like, hey, did you play golf? Did you play baseball? How about basketball? And so I can explain things a little bit into terminology, or not really terminology, but examples of concepts that they already understand and know, and how they apply to what we're doing. And that way you can convey the information faster and better. And there's just going to be some people too that understand what you're doing, but they might not really acknowledge it very well. I've ran into that a few times, and I learned to realize, to go, do you understand what I'm saying? Yeah. I'm just trying to figure out how to do it. And that's the question I always go to. But also to, look at those things, because it makes you a better instructor for people. The broader your skill sets are, and always constantly improving those, and try to keep it to the basics. Keep it in those fundamentals. Because you're going to find a lot of the issues are there. The stuff that's not there is because of their uniqueness, and praise them for their uniqueness. Some people are going to have some shots that you're surprised that they can throw, but it works for them, and it's not a bad thing. Are there bad ideas? Yes. But anybody that puts the time and effort into this and does the work to travel and try those things out, they're going to find out some of the bad ideas. So to wrap this up, figure out where you're at in your skill set with teaching, and what areas you are weak in teaching a concept, and go out, learn what those are, look to other people that are experts in those fields to teach you. And look at it as, I'm going to coach, not just do the thing, because that's the perspective you have to have when you're learning those things. Don't hyper focus on crazy little things. Have confidence in what you're doing and how you're giving your information, and be true to yourself, where you're not teaching stuff that you don't know, and being honest with people, because your integrity with those students will go a lot further when they understand there's things you do and don't know, and when you do know those things, they know that you're the person to go to. And the last part, I guess, really, it's like when you're working with people, figure out how they learn things, what works best for them, so you don't get frustrated trying to teach them. Observe them more than multiple times. Look at the basics they're doing. Teach them the basic concepts. Get them in the language and everybody else shares. Encourage them to go out and practice those skills. And sometimes you may have to isolate things and try to go to those isolations and work it out. Other than that, there's always those training tools. You have the Pell. You have slow work people use. Utilize those tools. To the best of your ability. What works for you, what works for them. And I guess that's really about it. And that was a long wrap up, right? But if anybody wants to get a hold of me, got questions, whatever, I'm more than willing to help. I don't really run around posting a bunch of stuff online, talking about fighting too much. But I am there. And there's a lot of people that are willing to teach out there that know stuff. Don't be afraid to ask them the dumb questions. Don't be afraid to ask them at practices. There's concepts out there and training tools that they have that you don't know, and because nobody asks them, they don't even share it. So make sure to go do that. I hope you all success in your fighting and teaching people how to fight, and try to always, ever improve your coaching, and that will make you even a better fighter too.